Hey everybody, how are you doing? And welcome to another edition of the Biotech Capital Compass. This is a video companion, and what this is attempting to do is talk about how biopharma works. This is part one of a two-part series. We might do more in the future. And really the genesis of this was that, we've been writing about individual stocks. We've been writing about how the pharma sector basically serves as defensive among institutional investors. Biotech is much more volatile. It's innovation based. We've been writing all of these things individually and talking about them individually. So this two-part series, we're going to try to start bringing that together. So it's sort of a little bit more what I call like a meta topic. We're going to try to get folks to a higher level of understanding why pharma and biotech are fundamentally different, even though they both develop drugs in general. Roche also has a diagnostics unit, and they both are part of healthcare. Many people, think of biotech and pharma as similar in many ways, and a lot of people use biopharma as a term. They're actually quite fundamentally different, both as businesses and then how that rolls up as potential investments. So really trying to help people kind of understand in a sort of a meta fashion, what we're trying to get here. So let's get going. Again, as we term this, this is how biopharma works, part one. Roche, pharma as defense, and biotech as barometer. This is the header for part one. And again, welcome back to the Biotech Capital Compass. It's a Thursday in Brooklyn. It's a little cold and cloudy today, but still very, very nice. Just a nice day. So, this again, as I said, was a slightly different kind of a series. We're not just analyzing biotech companies, not just discussing drug launches or clinical trial readouts, but stepping back and asking a bigger question. How do pharmaceutical and biotech companies actually function as businesses? Because while many investors lump healthcare, pharma, biotech into one broad category, they often behave very differently in the financial markets. And understanding why can help explain volatility, valuation, investor psychology, and ultimately share prices. So today we're going to be using Roche as a framework to explore an idea. Pharma as defense, and then contrast that with biotech as barometer. And this discussion would lead naturally into our next video companion on Vertex and CRISPR therapeutics. So this is part one of this series. So let's start with Roche. And by the way, we've written about Roche before. We've done a video companion there on Roche. And why we like it, as a single company, what all is going on there. But here we're going to now try to, bring together some broader topics. So when many investors think about pharmaceutical companies, they often think slow growth, dividends, large global businesses, maybe lower volatility. Historically, that has often been true. I think Roche is a much more interesting company than simply large Swiss pharma. Roche is almost a healthcare infrastructure platform. Think about what sits inside Roche: oncology, neurology, ophthalmology, immunology, metabolic diseases, diagnostics, AI-assisted pathology, blood-based diagnostics, global commercial operations. This is not just one drug company. This is one highly diversified healthcare ecosystem. And that diversification matters enormously, because large pharmaceutical companies are often built to stabilize cash flows across long periods of time. One way I increasingly think about this, is this, in this manner. Large pharma is fundamentally a cash flow stabilization machine. That doesn't mean there's no risk. There absolutely is. But structurally, these companies are built to absorb volatility, diversify revenue streams, manage patent cliffs, and continuously recycle capital into the next generation of products. So really, this has been the pharma business model now for a few decades. And Roche is a very good example, of this sort of transition. Historically, Roche depended heavily on Herceptin, Avastin, Rituxan. These were oncology products from the 1990s and 2000s that became major cash flow generation sort of machines almost. But over time, this company diversified into Ocrevus, Hemlibra, Vabysmo, Tecentriq, diagnostics, and a broad pipeline across multiple disease areas. And the reason was the patents for those original oncology platforms have gone now away for a while. So it had to diversify. And so the company became less dependent on any one therapy, and that changes the risk profile. Now, one thing I think many investors underestimate is foreign exchange, or FX. Sometimes when investors buy a pharmaceutical company, they think they're simply buying drug exposure. But often they're also buying a currency regime, a geographic revenue structure, and a particular form of macroeconomic resilience. Now, again, I just want to give you an idea here, a real world example. So the large cap biotech companies are present in about 30 to 40 countries worldwide. If you look at Amgen, Gilead, in their 10Ks and Qs, that's what they'll mention. Pharmaceutical companies are multinational in the sense that they are, present in 100 up to 150 countries. I believe J&J is present in 150 countries. Same with Pfizer, these larger companies. So currency or FX becomes a much bigger deal for them. Unlike, for example, biotech companies, which might have exposure to, for example, the euro and maybe the Japanese yen, increasingly the Chinese yuan also, but less of a currency play. Pharmaceutical companies have huge currency exposures. In fact, when I worked for a hedge fund, one of my mentors there taught me a lot and was a pharma analyst there, used to have a very complex FX or currency spreadsheet that modeled all of these cross rates. You couldn't do it as we can do today much more easily. But in those days, in the late 2000s, he had a very heavy duty FX. And in my own P&L, I invested in some Eurozone countries. And I actually got smoked a couple of times because I did not want a currency risk, a macro risk that translates into currency risk very carefully. And he actually taught me to look at this and think about this, which is why another reason that, we talk about Roche. So Roche is interesting because it is Swiss-based, it operates globally, generates significant US dollar-linked revenues, and also benefits from the stability of the Swiss franc. This creates a somewhat unusual dynamic. You effectively have a multinational healthcare company operating globally with a relatively stable currency architecture underneath it. And during periods of market stress and volatility, that stability can matter. So not because FX alone drives the investment thesis, but because it can reduce earnings volatility and improve visibility over time. And this is near and dear to my heart, as I said earlier, because it actually impacted me tremendously when I invested in a couple of European companies in the late 2000s. And because of the Eurozone crisis that happened because of Greece in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I actually got hurt a lot in my portfolio because of currency risk and macroeconomic uncertainty. So again, from a personal, my own personal experiences, hoping to translate into some learnings for people, our readers and our listeners. So again, as I said before, FX alone, doesn't drive the investment thesis, but because it can reduce earnings volatility and improve visibility over time if you model for it and pay attention to it. And this is where I think the phrase pharma as defense becomes more nuanced. Defense is not simply low beta. That's what a lot of people who think about the financial markets think about. Defense can also mean durability, resilience, diversification, payer integration, global scale, and healthcare system embeddedness. So, also let's talk about diagnostics. Roche has that as part of its business model. It's really, really interesting. So another reason we like Roche a lot and picked it, as an investment thesis, but also as a company that we're diving into more and more. Now, Roche becomes even more interesting when you look at diagnostics, because I increasingly suspect that future healthcare modes may not be just about drugs. They may also involve diagnostics, patient identification, AI, longitudinal healthcare data, integrated systems. Now, Roche has therapeutics, but it also has diagnostics. That combination potentially creates a more complex view of diseases itself. And I think that becomes increasingly important in oncology, in neurology, Alzheimer's disease, metabolic diseases, and precision medicine. So in other words, the future mode may not simply be who has the best drug. It may also become who understands the patient journey. Now, this is a very different way to think about healthcare companies. So here now, we're just going to talk a little bit about biotech as Barometer, because it's really, we're going to talk about it more in the next part 2 of this series. But let's just contrast that with biotech, Roche, therapeutics and diagnostics, and also biotech sector in general. Biotech often behaves very differently in financial markets. And one reason is it is fundamentally an innovation uncertainty machine. I really like this way of looking at it. Again, not good or bad, just structurally different. Biotech often reflects liquidity conditions, risk appetite, innovation, optimism, access to capital, and future scientific expectations. So that's why small and mid-cap biotech can become extraordinarily volatile during tightening cycles, rising interest rates, or risk-off periods. Because many biotech companies are not primarily valued on cash or on current cash flows. They're valued on future possibility, future approvals, future data, future science. A lot of future in biotech. Pharma, more about current, stabilization of cash flows. But when capital becomes more expensive or uncertainty rises, those future cash flows get discounted much more aggressively. That is why biotech often behaves more like a market barometer. Not necessarily because the science changed overnight, but because investor appetite for uncertainty changed. So let's talk about, an important nuance here, large cap biotech. Now, there's an important nuance here. Large cap biotech companies are not exactly pharma, even when they become profitable. Companies like Vertex, Regeneron, Gilead, Amgen can temporarily resemble pharmaceutical companies. And I actually stress temporarily. This is my opinion. Other people in the financial markets might disagree with me, but I think temporarily they can look like pharma companies, when they're very profitable. And companies as diverse as Vertex, Regeneron, Gilead, and Amgen, as I noted before, can temporarily resemble pharmaceutical companies with strong revenues, strong margins, sometimes dividends, large cash balances. But underneath, many of them still retain biotech DNA. Their valuations can still swing materially based on pipeline success, clinical trials outcome, platform durability, and future innovation expectations. So while pharma often manages uncertainty, biotech often manufactures upside through uncertainty. And that's a very different operating psychology. Now here, just going to be talking, I'm going to mention a little bit about what we're going to talk in part 2 of this series, what I call the bridge to Vertex and CRISPR. And this, naturally leads us into what will be our next video companion, because I think Vertex and CRISPR therapeutics may represent something very different, a possible infrastructure moat in genomic medicines. Not simply a drug moat, but authorized treatment centers, manufacturing complexity, gene editing ecosystem, specialized infrastructure, and long duration reinvestment. If Roche represents breadth defensiveness, Vertex may represent depth defensiveness. And I think that distinction may become increasingly important over the next decade. So in closing, ultimately this series is not really about which stock should go up. It is about understanding how modern healthcare capitalism actually functions, how business models shape risk, valuation, volatility, and investor psychology. Because the market is not simply pricing current revenues, it is pricing future uncertainty. So thank you very much for listening. I will see you next time for part 2, Vertex, CRISPR, and the infrastructure moat. Again, take care. Have a good day wherever you are. We'll talk soon.